This is BBC One. Now, Luquesa Burak with the BBC News at 1.
China carries out a mock military blockade of Taiwan as tensions rise in the South China Sea. It follows days of military operations by Beijing, which wants to bring the self-governing province back under its control. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer doubles down on an advert attacking Rishi Sunak for being soft on sex offenders, despite criticism from within his own party. As junior doctors prepare for 4 days of strike action from tomorrow, the NHS in England says it will prioritise emergency care. Also, a carriage fit for a king, as Buckingham Palace reveals the coronation route to Westminster Abbey. And Spain's Jon Rahm wins the Masters in Augusta and says he was inspired by the late, great Seve Ballesteros. China has carried out what it says is a mock air blockade of Taiwan, using jets carrying live ammunition in the latest escalation of tensions in the South China Sea. In response, the US has sent a destroyer to the area, which the Chinese have condemned as an illegal incursion. Well, China began a series of military exercises just hours after the Taiwanese president returned from a visit to the United States. It views Taiwan as a breakaway province that it wants to bring back under its control. Shaima Khalil has the report.
A show of force and fury. For a third day, China's military continued what it calls Operation Joint Sword, aerial and naval blockade drills to seal off the island. The Chinese army showed this short video of simulated attacks on Taiwan with missiles fired from land, sea and air into the island's territory. The Chinese military confirmed that its aircraft carrier, the Shandong, has taken part in Monday's exercises. It said fighter planes loaded with live ammunition had carried out multiple waves of simulated strikes on important targets. China is infuriated by the Taiwanese president's visit to the US. This is Beijing's promised robust response to what it says was a serious act of collusion. China sees the self-ruled island as part of its territory and insists it should be unified with the mainland, by force if necessary. Today, the Chinese government reiterated its message.
The
Taiwan question is for China alone to decide. The biggest threat to peace in the Taiwan Strait is Taiwanese separatism and its support from foreign forces.
In Shanghai, residents voiced their support for the military exercises.
Conducting these drills is a normal thing for China. We need to show the US that we are able to do this. What Taiwan says or thinks isn't important.
We still need to deter Taiwanese separatists. We're also telling the international community that Taiwan is a part of China. These operations are meaningful.
As China displayed a wide array of weapons, the U.S. Navy said its guided missile destroyer Milius performed what Washington calls a freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea, large parts of which are claimed by Beijing. The Chinese government said the U.S. illegally intruded in its waters. China said its military drills have ended successfully, but there is no end in sight for the tensions between Beijing and Washington. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Tokyo.
The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says he makes absolutely zero apologies for an advert suggesting that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been soft on the sentencing of sex offenders. He says he stands by the approach despite some senior figures in Labour publicly distancing themselves from it. Well, writing in today's Daily Mail, Keir Starmer dismissed claims that he was indulging in gutter politics. Here's our political correspondent, David Wallace-Lockhart.
The advert that's prompted a weekend of debate. In it, Labour suggests Rishi Sunak is content to see child sex abusers avoid jail. Writing in the Daily Mail today, the Labour leader has doubled down on the campaign, saying, "I make absolutely zero apologies for being blunt on this, no matter how squeamish it might make some feel." But former Labour Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell criticised this, tweeting, "If it's to be a serious debate, personal smears and Daily Mail-style distortions shouldn't distract from stating the hard facts." Labour's advert is based on figures going back to 2010. For some of that period, Sir Keir Starmer was head of the Crown Prosecution Service and sat on the Sentencing Council, meaning he had input into sentencing guidelines. But his allies say he shouldn't be held accountable for any leniency in the justice system.
Primary responsibility of the Sentencing Council is to ensure consistency when it comes to sentencing across the courts across the UK. He was the prosecutor, he was the chief prosecutor in the country. The minimum sentence, the maximum sentence is set by Parliament. If we're given the honour of serving the public in 2 years' time and after a general election, we will do something about it.
Labour are attacking the Prime Minister personally, but the Conservatives have hit back. A party source accused Sir Keir Starmer of failing to prosecute some of the worst people in Britain throughout his legal career. The Labour leader wants to appear tough on crime. By defending his party's tactics, he's given this story another day's oxygen. This appears to be a fight the Labour leadership wants to have. David Wallace-Lockhart, BBC News, Westminster.
Today marks the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, which was signed on April the 10th, 25 years ago. The accord helped end decades of sectarian violence and restored self-government to Northern Ireland. But the power-sharing agreement between the Protestant and Catholic communities has been paralysed since the Democratic Unionist Party objected to post-Brexit trading arrangements. Well, let's speak to our correspondent, Charlotte Gallagher, who's in Belfast for us this lunchtime. Charlotte.
Northern Ireland has changed enormously over the past 25 years, and thankfully the political violence that claimed the lives of thousands of people is now very rare. There are still threats though. We saw police last week warn that dissident Republicans were planning attacks. But really, what's overshadowing the Good Friday Agreement anniversary at the moment is the lack of a functioning government at Stormont. It's essentially mothballed, with the Democratic Unionist Party refusing to go back over their concerns about post-Brexit trading arrangements. Rishi Sunak has said it's his priority to get Stormont back up and running, and he referenced those people that negotiated the Good Friday Agreement, saying those leaders accepted compromises and they made difficult decisions, no doubt referring to Northern Ireland politicians at the moment. Now, Joe Biden arrives in Belfast tomorrow, but he's only got one public engagement here. He's going to be going to a new university campus here in Belfast. He'll not be going to Stormont. There'll be no speech there. He seemingly wants to avoid the political standoff here that is really entrenched at the moment, and then he'll head to the south of Ireland for a homecoming of sorts with his ancestral roots.
Charlotte, thank you very much. NHS England says that it'll prioritise emergency and urgent care during the 4-day junior doctors' strike, which begins tomorrow. The BMA has called for a 35% pay rise to make up for the impact of inflation in recent years. Well, the government says that's unaffordable and that it's being militant. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
I, as a doctor, don't believe doctors should strike. I think our first responsibility is to our patients.
Paul is both a doctor and a patient. He was due to have an operation on his leg last month, but it was cancelled because of the junior doctors' strike then. He's been given another date, but it's meant more weeks of discomfort and strong painkillers.
I'm unable to work, which I find very frustrating. I need help with just simple things like putting on a sock. I need assistance getting in and out of the shower. Coming up and down stairs is difficult, and I have a very limited range for being able to walk.
Camilla loves sailing and hiking, but that's been limited by a knee condition which needs an operation.
To be told 72 hours before the operation.
She doesn't want to criticise the junior doctors. Her op's been postponed twice because of the strike action in England, and she says that's highly inconvenient.
It messed about me, it messed about my employer, it messed about my husband, and it messed about his employer as well. So it's a case of that it's not just the patient whose operation is cancelled. impacted. It's everybody around them that's needed to support them through.
Hi Sandra, how are you getting on? Looks like a busy afternoon.
Here at one of England's biggest hospital trusts, they've had to cancel or rearrange thousands of outpatient appointments and more than 3/4 of planned operations and procedures.
I think there is anxiety across all of the clinical professions.
The medical director told me there were serious concerns about the impact on patients.
I think everyone is working very hard to make sure that all of our rotas are covered and all of our services are as safe as they could possibly be. It's very difficult to be absolutely certain that in any group of patients who are seeking help, that by delaying their care, there won't be harm.
The Trust has drafted in consultants to cover junior doctors, though it says that's difficult because of Easter holidays. The Doctors' Union argues that patients are already waiting too long, never mind the strike.
I'm sorry to anyone who's had any elective activity that's cancelled because of these strikes, but ultimately it's that growing waiting list which is part of the reason that's driving this dispute. There's over 7 million patients on the waiting list at the moment, and that's only expected to grow because of our workforce crisis.
The government said pay demands were unreasonable and the union should come back to the table with a realistic approach. The dispute continues. The strike starts at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
A boat with 400 migrants on board remains adrift in the Mediterranean off the coast of Malta. The vessel is said to be out of fuel, taking on water, and the captain said to have abandoned the ship. There are 2 merchant ships in the area, one of which has asked to supply fuel, but there's been no attempt at a rescue. Elon Musk has asked the BBC for clarification about how exactly it's funded. It follows objections from the corporation that one of its Twitter accounts had been labelled as government-funded media. Well, the @BBC account is mainly used to promote programmes and not news content. The BBC says it's independent and funded by the public through the licence fee. The King and Queen Consort will travel to Westminster Abbey for the coronation in the newest of the royal carriages, complete with air conditioning and electric windows. The route to the Abbey has also been revealed, as our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
Less than 4 weeks now to their big day, and preparations for the coronation of King Charles III and the crowning of Camilla as his Queen are in full swing. First, the route that will take them from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey and back again has been confirmed. From the Palace, down the Mall to Trafalgar Square, and then down Whitehall, around Parliament Square to the Abbey's west door. The return route will be the same journey in reverse, a much shorter journey than that taken by the late Queen Elizabeth after her coronation. The King and Queen Consort will travel to the coronation in one of the newest royal carriages, the Diamond Jubilee State Coach, escorted by the Household Cavalry.
It's made of aluminium, which is quite unusual for coaches. Most of them are made of wood. And it's also got hydraulic suspension, meaning that the ride is incredibly comfortable, a very modern innovation.
Inside Westminster Abbey, the service itself will see the crown jewels, the regalia, the symbols of the monarch's authority, being used for the first time since Queen Elizabeth was crowned. The sovereign's orb and sceptres, swords, bracelets and spurs, all will have their part in this elaborate religious service, which culminates with the crowning of the monarch with St. Edward's crown. Camilla will be crowned with Queen Mary's crown, which contains some of the Cullinan diamonds. She'll also hold the Queen Consort's rod, which is made of ivory. They will process from the Abbey, just as Queen Elizabeth did, for the return journey to the palace. And for that, they will board this, the 18th century gold state coach. It weighs 4 tons and it's notoriously uncomfortable. The King and Queen may be relieved that their journey back to the palace, escorted by military detachments, will be only a quarter of the length of that undertaken by Queen Elizabeth in 1953. One innovation: the palace has launched a new emoji to mark the coronation. So, a ceremony rooted in history with at least one modern touch. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Jon Rahm has won the Masters in Augusta. The Spaniard finished 12 shots under par to win by 4 shots and see off the American duo Brooks Koepka and Phil Mickelson. Andy Swiss reports.
Once again, Spain reigned at Augusta. Jon Rahm roaring to victory after a Masters masterclass. He began the last round 2 behind Brooks Koepka, but following a poor start, the American never recovered. Instead, it was 52-year-old Phil Mickelson that charged into contention. Beginning the final round 10 shots back, he produced a dazzling display to set a testing target. But Rahm isn't one of the world's top players for nothing, and how he held his nerve. With a 4-shot lead on the final hole, he was able to savour the atmosphere before finishing in style.
Jon Rahm is the Masters champion.
On what would have been the birthday of his hero, the late Seve Ballesteros, Rahm had done it, and as he celebrated with his wife and children, his pride was plain to see.
Still really hasn't sinked in yet. I'm looking at this course and I'm still thinking I have a couple more holes left to win, and can't really say anything else. You know, this one was for Seve. I know he was up there helping, and help he did.
And so, after Seve Ballesteros, Jose Maria Olazabal and Sergio Garcia, Spain has another Masters champion. And in Jon Rahm, this famous tournament has the worthiest of winners. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Augusta.
OK, time for a look at the weather now. And joining us here in the studio is Chris Fawkes. I don't like the look of that sky behind you, Chris.
No, we've lost yesterday's sunshine, Quessa, and instead this is what we've got for many of us this afternoon. We've got some pretty big downpours heading across the skies. This thunderstorm working across the skies of St Helens. Now on the satellite picture, we can see the early morning rain clearing out of the way, but there are loads of shower clouds following on. And out in the Atlantic, we've got trouble brewing. A strong jet stream is going to develop a next area of low pressure to bring some strong winds our way through Tuesday night. More on that in just a moment. For today, though, it is a day of heavy downpours, and for the most part, the showers lasting, half an hour or so. Then the sun will be back out. However, we do have a big clump of storms going across northern England in particular. And so the rain here will probably last a couple of hours. There are lots of thunderstorms across northern England, probably some hail mixed in as well. And our temperatures, for the most part, around 12 to 15 degrees. Now, overnight tonight, showers continue to affect northwestern areas, but otherwise the weather becomes a bit dry, a bit calmer. And with clear skies, it's quite a chilly night. Temperatures between 3 and 6 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow morning, make the most of the early morning sunshine. Should be a fine start for many, although there will be showers from the word go across the northwest. Later in the afternoon, we'll start to see the next weather system approach from the west, bringing rain to Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England. The rain turning heavy, the winds picking up as well, and temperatures not quite as high as those of today, 10 to 14 degrees. Now, Tuesday night, we'll see a zone of strong winds affecting western areas. Gusts could reach 50 or 60 miles an hour. But there is a potential for the area of low pressure to just deepen a little bit more. And if that happens, we could see some particularly strong winds affecting some of our most exposed western locations. Gusts of 70, even 80 miles an hour are possible, but there's some uncertainty about the exact depth of this area of low pressure. Either way, by the time we get into Wednesday, we're looking at windy weather across all of the UK, really, with outbreaks of rain and some heavy thundery showers widespread. It's going to stay gusty, with gusts of wind running around 50 or even 60 miles an hour across parts of Wales and western England. And with some slightly colder air around, you might even see a bit of snow up over some of the highest mountains in Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. Temperatures 8 to 12 degrees, so wherever you are, it's going to feel a lot cooler, especially given those strong and gusty winds. Now, later in the week, those winds will calm down, but there is a little bit more rain in the forecast. However, as we get into next week, we're going to start to see the winds turn into more of a south or southeasterly direction, and so temperatures will be on the rise. Before we get there, though, it looks like it's going to be quite wet and windy over the next few days. Quessa.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And a reminder of our top story today. China has carried out a mock military blockade of Taiwan as tensions rise in the South China Sea. Well, that's all from the BBC News at 1 team. We'll be back with the next news at 6:30 p.m. Until then, it's goodbye from me and Chris. And on BBC One now, we join the BBC's news teams where you are.